All right, setting up for the thumbnail. Three, two, one, and we're live. Cosplaying as a Twitch streamer on YouTube. Okay, so what's up? Welcome back. More like a welcome back for me. I haven't done this in a really long time. This is not just clickbait. I did this a couple days ago, and man. All right, so story time. All right, so we're gonna take a step back. We're gonna jump back 2 years. Picture this. It's the summer of 2020. You're depressed. I'm depressed. We're all shut inside, quarantining, whatever. So you know what? We're gonna treat ourselves. We're gonna go to Costco, get a ribeye steak. We're gonna cook it, and we're gonna post it on Instagram because everyone's on this food cooking self discovery saga. I don't know if you remember or if you weren't there for it. A lot of people, or at least a lot of my friends, were really into channels like Bon Appetit, uh, binging with Babish. This is kind of like the golden age of YouTube cooking, where a lot of channels started to get a lot of growth and a lot of exposure because people didn't have anything to do. We were trying to figure out how to spend our time. So a week, 2 weeks, a month, a year, another year goes by, and then all of a sudden, hey, look, there's a steak in my freezer, and it's like it was it was Best Buy 2 years ago. So it must have been in there for at least 2 years, if not more. So yeah, that was a couple days ago that I figured that out. It's April 17th, 2022. I'm cleaning out my fridge. There's a bunch of gross inedible stuff. We're not going to talk about that. But there is one thing that I think might actually be good to eat, and that's the steak. So Costco sells these Tevaglot kosher cuts of beef that are frozen solid and vac sealed. They're basically like solid meat ice that you bring home. Like the only time that it's ever exposed to warmer temperatures is either when you're moving it from the freezer to your shopping cart into your car, or when you're actually defrosting it because it goes right back into the freezer. So I'm a pretty curious guy, and I think against the better judgment of most normal people, most sane people, I was willing to give this a shot. And my theory was that this steak is probably good to eat. And if it isn't, no, it's the worst thing that can happen, right? Like I get sick from food poisoning. Uh, Next time, don't eat that 2-year-old steak in your fridge. Like I mean, you'll learn. And I think what people find is like doing stupid stuff is entertaining, and doing stupid stuff teaches you better lessons than just being smart and tossing it in the trash. And you don't want to throw like a cow lived its life so that I could eat this steak. I'm not going to just throw it away. So I came up with this theory. I have a degree in bioengineering. I've been learning about food and cooking for the past 2 years on YouTube. So I'm basically qualified to make this like food safety judgment here, right? Right? Well, anyways, so here's what I came up with. This is really good science, really sound science. I have a steak. The steak is either good or it's bad, and that's not in like a health safety way. That's like in a taste way, like it tastes good or it tastes bad. And I either get food poisoning or I don't, right? And I feel like the the chances of me not getting food poisoning, just off the bat, are pretty low, just because it's been in there for 2 years. There are a lot of things that could go wrong. And so I decided to try and figure out what those things were and how to break that down, what the possible concerns could be. And so we're gonna get into some actual science. This is like Ooga Booga FDA. Skip this if you don't care about it. But basically, inside of every steak, there's proteins, fats, and water. And the ways that they can break down are either chemical or mechanical or physical. So mechanical is just another way, like a fancy way of saying physical breakdown. And that's like using a meat tenderizer. So the first piece, or the first way that things can break down, enzymes. All life requires enzymes to work, or all life requires enzymes to persist. Enzymes have a specific temperature range by which they work, and their job is to break larger molecules down into smaller molecules. If you're outside of that temperature sweet spot, the enzymes will not be that effective, and really cold temperatures, like freezing, make enzymes very inefficient. So that's one way that the steaks could have gone bad, and hopefully I've taken care of that just by leaving it in the freezer. The second method, or the second mechanism, is oxidation. And so oxygen and light are very well. Oxygen is a very reactive molecule. Light is a source of energy that makes molecules react. These can turn fats and oils from like really large fats and oils into smaller fats and oils into other components that can build into fats and oils. And as fats oxidize, they undergo something called rancidification. Basically, if any fat gets rancid, it starts to smell bad, it starts to taste bad, it's not as nutritious. And it's the same reason why apples will start to turn brown once you cut open into them. If you don't spray a little bit of lemon juice onto the apple, they'll start to turn brown because they're starting to oxidize. There's a chemical reaction happening because it's been exposed to oxygen. And the same thing can happen with the steaks. Fortunately for me, those steaks were vac sealed, so there was no oxygen, and they were inside of a dark freezer, so there was no light. So hopefully there was not too much oxidation either. And then finally, this is more for bacterial growth. So the osmolarity matters, and osmolarity is basically the concentration of salt ions inside of a fluid. And so we have three words: hypertonic, isotonic, hypotonic. They're just references for if it's saltier compared to the surroundings, equally salty compared to the surroundings, or less salty compared to the surroundings. And so these steaks were some kind of brine processing, salted per the packaging. And so hypertonic solution or some kind of hypertonic environment means that if there was any bacteria or if there was any kind of pathogens that were growing or just present on the steaks themselves, it would be really hard for them to grow because the water inside of those cells is getting sucked out by the salt that's outside of it, inside of that vac seal bag. So again, another really good example of why or how the people that manufactured and produced that steak made sure that it was relatively food safe and hopefully food safe for a long time. Next up, pasteurization. This is kind of more of an aside, and this is going to apply more towards food prep that happens a little bit later. But this is a diagram that comes from the FDA. Part of the FDA's job is to provide guidelines for, I think like the Food and Something Administration. I used to know the answer to this. I would get reamed by my professor for not knowing this anymore. I want to say Food and Drug Administration. But this is a guideline for what temperature and how long you need to hold your steak at that temperature for it to be food safe. So the stuff in red is your medium rare, and then the stuff in yellow is your medium well. And so that borders on like well done, where it's basically gray on the inside. The premise here is that these temperatures and these time periods are only going to kill anything that's growing. It's not going to purge or remove any bad substances that have accumulated. So if you had if you had caffeine, someone injected caffeine into your steak, or there was a new type of bacteria that created caffeine by digesting steaks. Pasteurization is not going to remove that caffeine from that meat. So as you eat that steak, you're still going to be ingesting all of those compounds that were byproducts of decomposition, but you're just not going to be ingesting the organism itself. So you're reducing the risk of getting sick by infection, and you're just increasing the risk of getting sick by eating byproduct. So ideally, this makes sure that it's food safe from like a bacterial growth perspective, but it doesn't ensure that it's food safe from like a byproduct perspective. And I just wanted to highlight that real quick. And then on to physical and mechanical degradation. So obviously, when you put something inside of a freezer, if you don't saran wrap it or seal it properly, these were vac sealed, you get something called freezer burn, where the fridge sucks out all the moisture, and it's at such a low temperature that the meat slowly desiccates. It dries up, and the fibers start to tear. That's not good. It tastes bad. Don't do it. Don't eat it. The other piece is purging, and that's where as something freezes and as it melts and refreezes again, it'll create new ice crystals that slice at a microscopic, almost at a cellular level, through the meat fibers. They're making cuts. They're blowing cells up as the water expands, because ice expands when it freezes, and it releases a lot of these intracellular intercellular fluids, the stuff that's inside the cell, and that contains a lot of like really important nutrients, and also it affects the taste. And so the quote from theculinarypro.com is that repeated freezing and thawing changes the quality of foods. The textures become soft and mushy, and the moisture loss creates a drying effect. Flavor, color, nutrients, they all suffer. And I don't know how many times this happened. Every time you open the fridge or you put something in it, you're inducing a temperature change. And so, every time that happens, potentially you're decreasing the quality of the meat and you're decreasing the taste of the food. And that's could be bad. So I have a couple clips here now that we're just gonna go over real quick. These are actually like I just shot these on whim at the day of. I'll roll the footage. I'll let myself speak for myself. I'll let yeah, whatever.
So I got this ribeye back in COVID, back in 2020. You can see by the sell by date, it says August 7, or best by date, August 7, 2020.
And you can see that was like a 2-pound steak.
It came from Costco in kind of like a frozen block, and I kept it in the back of my freezer for, I guess, 2 years now. And I don't know if it's still good. I really wanted to make tacos today, so that's what we're doing. But I guess we're going to answer a couple questions and see what's going on.
Yeah, like, am I going to get sick and is it still good to eat? Those are the questions. So I ended up, if you go back to the video, the previous video, oh no, leaks. If you go back to the previous video, you can see that I
don't know if it's...
I thawed it inside of this little pan filled with water. I let that run for like 5 hours, and it slowly went up to temp. I drained all the fluid inside, and then I dried it off with a paper towel because I actually don't want any of that fluid. There's a greater concern for me that the stuff inside is bad than the meat itself, like the remaining meat protein. So I dried it off, I salted it, I peppered it, threw it in the air fryer, which probably dehydrated it further, just to make sure that it was like fully cooked. And I think I overdid it a little bit, but once I finished cooking it in the air fryer, I finished it on the pan, kind of like a reverse sear. And that's where we get this.
Alright, so this is what the finished steak looks like. Obviously, it's been a bit overdone. It's more like a medium well. And I think what's interesting is, if you look at the meat, I don't know if you can tell, but it almost kind of looks drier, flakier, kind of like almost dusty in a way. I feel like maybe the freezing process over the past 2 years has just caused this to desiccate a little bit, and it's kind of just broken down.
Yeah, that steak looks weird.
I've never really cooked like a dry aged steak before, so I don't know if this is common in dry.
Okay, this steak doesn't look like a steak. It looks like roast beef. Which, it kind of makes sense. I mean, roast beef is made by preserving steak in like a brine, right? And this was basically brined for 2 years. So it kind of makes sense. But it's still so weird to me that it looks closer to roast beef than it does to ribeye.
Steaks, but it really seems different. And you can kind of see on some of these other cuts where it kind of just it split apart along the fat cap, or the inner fat that ran through the two muscles. Let's see how it tastes.
Yeah, and I didn't want to eat that fat either. I was afraid that it went bad.
It's weird. It definitely tastes crumblier too.
Now, one thing that I did notice is that as I was cooking this steak, like every time you cook a steak, obviously if there's fat inside of the meat, it's gonna render out, and you're gonna collect a lot of it. You can see from the amount of grease that's on my cutting board, as well as like outside of this footage. I mean, the amount of grease that I collected from my pan, from my air fryer. There was a lot of fat that ended up rendering out, and I don't know if it's because I feel like it's not because of my cooking methods. I've cooked this way plenty of times in the past, and I've never seen this much fat render out. So I wonder if there was something to do with the repeat heating and thawing, or rather keeping it in my fridge for 2 years, that ended up giving us like this much extra runoff, whatever the right word for it is. But so I made these steaks for a reason. I wanted to eat tacos. You probably saw that from the leak earlier. So that's what these were, right? 2 years of spending time on YouTube, watching YouTube videos, learning how to cook, and watching other people learn how to plate food, aka make food that looks pretty but not necessarily food that is tasty, right? So these were kind of, it was like, okay, here's the description. There is an organic corn tortilla, a ribeye steak with a mango salsa and an avocado crema. 3 tacos. I feel like you would probably pay like $12 for this. In like a restaurant setting or even like a sit down setting. Um, it does not taste like $12. It is not as good as it looks. This is like me spoiling the magic, but the mango is too sweet. There's too much mango. There's not enough like acidity from the tomatoes. There's not enough spice from the peppers. The crema is kind of lackluster. It's you don't really get much flavor out of it, honestly. It's supposed to be cilantro avocado crema. It doesn't really taste like much because it's not that seasoned. And of course, the steak doesn't really taste like much because it's been in the freezer for 2 years. But it looks really pretty, right? Hey. So yeah, I mean, this was a couple days ago. I think it was like Sunday. It's like Wednesday now or Tuesday now. So I didn't get sick, or I haven't been sick as of the past 2 or 3 days. It's passed through my system at this point, so I think it's safe to say that 2-year-old steak is good to eat, but it is not tasty. So if you're really hungry and you have nothing better, you know, by all means go for it. You're not gonna get sick. It's perfectly fine. You'll get some of the nutrition, not as much nutrition as if you had a fresh piece of meat, but that's fine. What I did find, like kind of unrelated to this, but I did find Costco whole shrimp also in my fridge that in my freezer that I'm a little bit more scared of trying to cook. It is also 2 years old, and the issue with the shrimp that I didn't have with the steak is, it's not airtight container. It comes in like this plastic or this paper box, and I think there's like a plastic wrap around it, but I've opened it and I've cooked with it before, like once or twice, before I forgot about it. So it potentially could be desiccating. First off, second off, there are fats inside of these shrimp. They're whole shrimp, so the innards, the guts, the head fats, those could also just all be breaking down slowly if it ever like unthawed, or if it ever thawed and then refroze. Those could be breaking down, making the meats taste bad, and then also contaminating the meats themselves, like the flavors having them leach over. And that's not good, because the whole point of buying whole head-on shrimp is so that you can enjoy the full flavor of the shrimp, which includes some compounds or some components that are not time safe. They break down very quickly. That's why they're frozen, particularly the shrimp heads, which are really good for making stock. So if you thought this was interesting, if you thought this was cool, let me know. Leave a comment. I'm probably going to keep making these. I think it's like a nice little COVID continued distraction for me. So I'm going to keep making some videos like this on food, some videos on some other COVID activities that I've been up to, just to give myself a life update, and also just to keep up with things. But anyways, yeah. So if you thought this was cool, like, share. I don't care if you subscribe. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.